Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are seated. It's my real pleasure to start this webinar with this conversation with Minister Tang, who is the Digital Minister of Taiwan. And we will have a discussion on technological change and its impact on society and global order. Minister, very happy to have you on board. Thank you for your time. After your initial remarks, you will have a discussion with Dr. Alice Pannier, who is the head of the new program which started at Ifri 1 month ago on geopolitics of technologies. Welcome, Alice. And you will be also questioned by Dr. Marc Julienne, who is a researcher at the Center for Asian Studies at Ifri in charge of China. Welcome, Marc. Minister, let me remind that this final session, it is the final session, sorry, of a 4-part webinar series, which was organized by the Ifri Center for Asian Studies on technological revolution and regional order in East Asia. Let me remind you that the first session dealt with many of the political, economic, and security issues around digital technology and its impacts on society and the East Asian region. We had a session on technology and politics, opportunities and challenges for governance and democracies. We had a session on technology and economy, with a discussion techno-nationalism versus techno-globalism. And we had a session on technology and security, how to adapt to changing cybersecurity in East Asia. So this final webinar will be the conclusion. I should also remind that this webinar series has benefited from the support of the Taipei Representative Office in France, and from the Taiwanese Foreign Ministry, as our annual conference has for many years. And obviously, that's a way for me to thank and to welcome my friend Ambassador Francois Wu and his team in making this discussion possible. It's also a way for me to thank the Center for Asian Studies in Ifri, and in particular, John Seaman, who organized everything. So, Minister, the floor is yours. And after that, I will manage a discussion with Alice and Marc. I should also say to our participants that obviously they can ask you some questions with the Q&A, and we will save a part of our discussion for this question coming from our participants. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Really happy to be here virtually to share for maybe 10 minutes about the idea of digital social innovation in Taiwan and how that enabled Taiwan to counter the pandemic with no lockdown and counter the infodemic with no takedown. And I would start by saying in Taiwan, we have these 3 keywords for social innovation on the digital realm. It's called fast, fair, and fun. The fast part pertains to collective intelligence, in particular, when last September, on the Taiwanese equivalent of Reddit, the PTT, when a young doctor shared Dr. Li Wenliang's whistleblowing from Wuhan, we immediately took action because not only is PTT not for profit, it's entirely in the social sector, but because people who discuss the veracity of this whistleblowing can do so knowing that Taiwan, according to the Civicus Monitor, is the only place in Asia with a completely open freedom of speech, of press, and so on, of assembly, and so on, environment, so they can do so without fearing harmonization. And so in this sense, we were able to get an early warning, early alert, and by 1st January, we started doing health inspections. But also it relies on the collective intelligence of people who are not that much into bulletin board systems, but rather have the access to a landline. For example, back in April, when we're doing daily press conferences, briefings from the Central Epidemic Command Center, there was a young boy who called saying that, hey, I don't want to go to school because you're rationing out masks and all I get is pink medical mask and people will laugh at me and so on. The very next day, after hearing this from the call center 1922, which is a more than 95% immediate rate of picking up, the medical officers, including our minister, all wore pink medical masks. And so the boy became the most hit boy in the class, for only he has the color that hero wear, but also the minister said that Pink Panther was his childhood idol or something. And so it became a really good gender mainstreaming and a mask as fashion statements that grew out of here, which makes the digital social information much more easy to spread because it's not seen as something that's top down, but rather something that we all have a part in. And also, I mentioned rationing, but we do so with the intermediaries, the pharmacists that are trusted already by the local people, including the very old people. They already go to the pharmacists for the refilling of their chronic prescriptions. And so we work with the pharmacists who are already trusted by the community to ration out based on the National Health Insurance card. So anyone queuing in line can see exactly how many masks are there in stock for that pharmacy, and people who queue after them will be able to check their phone or use a chatbot to understand that this is actually decreasing in real time. It's like a distributed ledger with more than 100 different visualization tools, analysis, and so on. And that in turn enabled the data analytics experts to point out the places that have an uneven distribution, which is why we started then to work with 12,000 convenience stores in addition to the 6,000 or so pharmacies to enable 24-hour pickup. And that in turn gets more than 3/4 of population into the habit of washing hands and wearing masks, and that in turn reduced the R value, the basic transmission rate, to be under 1. But also very importantly, we make sure that our communication material is more viral than the conspiracy theories. There used to be a conspiracy theory that says the tissue paper material are being confiscated to make medical masks. And our premier, who wiggles his button a little bit, you just saw his front side, this is his back side, says in very large font that each of us only have a pair of bottoms. And that went absolutely viral because in Mandarin, it's a homonym to stockpile twin, sounds the same as bottoms twin. And so people just laugh about it. It's hilarious, but it also contains this table that says the medical masks are made out of domestic material while the tissue paper is made out of South American material. So there's no way that, increasing the production of the medical mask to from 2 million a day to 20 million a day could impact the tissue paper supply. And so the panic buying died down within just a couple of days. And when we're sharing the social media platforms on the physical distancing, which is the upper left side, we explained it in terms of the Shiba Inu, a very cute spoke stock of the Ministry of Health and Welfare. And so the mask message, which is on the bottom right, I think it's the essential one. It says, wear a mask to protect yourself from your own unwashed hands. So it's entirely rational self-interest. And also, it's very easy to spread. And this spoke stock is very cute across age groups and across political inclinations. So nobody will spend time to make a conspiracy theory to dispute what this stock has to say, which is really common sense. And that in turn increased the proper hand washing rate when it comes to the pandemic prevention. So that is the part about the pandemic. And also, whenever we detect any rumor, this is the infodemic part, we also make sure that within 60 minutes, each ministry have this engagement officers that can roll out funny memes. This is another funny meme where our premier again shared his young photo saying, I may be bald now, but I will not punish people. And this rumor that says perming hair will be subject to $1 million fine if you do it multiple times per week is simply not true. What we've done is introducing a labeling requirement for hair products. And on the bottom of this picture, a now bald premier says, however, if you perm your hair many times a week, it will not damage your bank account, but it will damage your hair. Just look at me for what will happen to your hair. And that, again, went viral. And more people saw this humorous message than the message previously based on anger or outrage. So that channels their energy, instead of going into discrimination or revenge, channels the energy into co-creation. And that, in turn, made the K-12 curriculum much more flexible. Instead of media literacy, we say media competence. Instead of data literacy, we say data competence. That is to say, the middle schoolers and primary schoolers even even all had a chance to participate into the fact-checking efforts by working with professional journalists, while the Taiwan Fact Check Center and so on made sure that we do a notice and public notice on the trending disinformation. And of course, we work with the social media to ban foreign sponsored propaganda, to do honest advertisement, essentially treating precision targeted advertisement during election as campaign donations. And so here are some real examples. Instead of taking anything down, we just put something up. We say this is a Reuters photo that got miscaptioned, small information, intentional disinformation is first shared by the Chang'an Sword of the Zhongyang Zhenfa Wei, the CCP's Central Political and Law Unit. And everyone who shared it on social media saw this public notice. We didn't interfere with them sharing, but we need to share with this narrative going on that says this is essentially state-sponsored propaganda. Again, this one, the CIA made special invisible ink, so the President Tsai Ing-wen always wins. This is clarified by inviting people of all the very different parties into the counting scene. So while they're counting, there's YouTubers in the observers seat, basically doing their own tallying, their own counting in real time. And because the popular YouTubers were all over the place, it's actually much more easy to verify for yourself, just like with the medical mask case, that the system works as intended than it is to share the conspiracy theories. And so this is the part about the infodemic. And finally, I would say that for all the structural issues like this, where it looks like during the pandemic, we have to either sacrifice public health on one side or sacrifice, I don't know, the privacy or the data collection perimeters on the other side, we can always find somewhere, this is my office, by the way, the Social Innovation Lab, where people can meet in the middle and then say, instead of doing a zero-sum trade-off, we can do a either-or. We can make new data applications without any new data collection. We can make a real-time countering infodemic effort without taking anything down, and certainly without a lockdown. And this is, I guess, the spirit of co-creation and also of digital social innovation. And part of it is that sticking to the time, and I understand that I'm at time, so I'll just stop right here.
Thank you very much, Minister, for this very substantive and concrete presentation. I turn now to Alice and to Marc, and we will ask them if you agree with me to be fast, fair, and fun as you were. So, Alice, please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you so much, Minister Tang. So many questions pop up in my mind when I listen to you. I think I want to just bring up a couple of questions to you that you can choose. You know what you want to address. I think there's the first thing is about this digital democracy and how it relates to politics. So you just finished by saying there is something beyond political polarization, and that's called consensus building, and that's called having an open office where people can come discuss ideas, and that's also called using digital tools to create consensus on political issues via the civic engagement, and coming to the conclusion that people will eventually find a common ground. So that's interesting from the viewpoint of, you know, Europe or the United States, I guess, where political polarization has become the norm rather than consensus building. And you also suggest in your various policy talks that there is no right or wrong in terms of what people believe, and that it is possible to find a consensus anyway on public policy. So I kind of want to ask you then, what is the role of politics? You are yourself a minister, you have progressive political ideas. How do you put forward and defend those ideas in a context where the goal is to build consensus and to find, if you like, a majority position? Are you still doing politics, or are you being merely a mediator? So I'm interested in how you view your role in political terms in that context. Also related to your role as a Minister for Digital Affairs, I'm really curious to know more about how you relate to counterparts across the world, whether there are any specific partners that you work with, and if so, what sort of work you're trying to do, and to what extent, I guess, this digital democracy is a soft power tool for Taiwan, how it is built almost as also a foreign policy posture that gives a foreign or an international dimension to your role. I guess your presence virtually with us today also testifies to the fact that there is definitely an international dimension in your role. Which leads me to my third question, which is about replicating the Taiwan experience on civic engagement and direct or participative or deliberative democracy. It seems to me that Taiwan is similar to Iceland and to some extent to Estonia, which are small countries, geographically small, self-contained polities. And I'm wondering to what extent you think that there is a way to expand this civic participation, civic engagement to a broader scale in larger polities where people's realities may be more diverse. I know you suggested elsewhere that in Taiwan, it's only 1.5 hours by train to go from north to south, so people can come and contribute from any part of the world if they want to actively, physically attend, a meeting. I'm kind of wondering if you think there is still things that can be replicated to larger polities or even to international and global governance. It'd be interesting to know if you see some civic participation for global political issues and civic engagement across the world on common global issues. I also have questions about securing the digital democracy. Maybe I leave the floor to Marc for that. But there is definitely something also interesting about, you mentioned data privacy. Be interested to know more about Taiwan's data protection regime, and also the articulation between open source, citizen contribution, digital tools and the hardware behind and the infrastructure behind and how you secure those. But I'll leave the floor to Marc. I think I've already asked you a ton of questions. Feel free to choose what you want to address. Thank you, Marc.
Thank you, Alice. Over to you, Marc.
Thank you very much, Minister, for your very interesting presentation. I will start on a topic that is very important in Europe and especially in France, which is digital sovereignty. You probably know that in Europe we have been talking a great deal about digital sovereignty for the past few years, and we are still far from being there. So it often seems that we are not very clear, even on the very definition of what is digital sovereignty. So could you tell us what would be your definition from your experience and knowledge about digital sovereignty, and do you consider Taiwan as a digital sovereign state? My second question is on COVID-19 and technology. You address in your presentation the overall strategy, and I would like to push a little further on what is the specific Taiwanese strategy with tech. You probably know that in France, as in many countries in Europe, we had and we still have difficulties to use technology as an asset to fight against COVID-19. And in France, we have already launched 2 apps, but with very little success. So the question, for example, of tracking cell phones is almost a taboo in France for personal data protection and for privacy reasons. So I know that in Taiwan you have a very different perspective on that, and I would love to hear you to see how do you tackle these challenges between, as you said at the end of your presentation, between public health versus privacy in terms of technology. And one short third question on 5G, which is another very important issues here in Europe. I believe, but please confirm me if or tell me if I'm wrong, but that Taiwan is using Nokia and Ericsson equipments for its 5G infrastructure. Could you rapidly tell us what drove Taiwan's choice towards these 2 companies? Because we still have difficulties to choose, obviously, in Europe. I will stop here, but I would love to ask several other questions if we have time. Thank you.
Before going to you, Minister, I remind all participants that they can use the Q&A if they want to interact with you. I have listed 7 questions, Minister, so you have time to elaborate on each of them as you want. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, gladly, I don't have anything after this, so I'm happy to answer this all day. But I don't know whether you have all day, but we'll see. So, yeah.
Take your time.
Yeah, okay. So on the question about so-called digital sovereignty, well, my title is Digital Minister.tw. I usually use it all lowercase or all uppercase, so small caps, if you will. And the .tw part is definitely, I mean, even in the PRC, even in Shanghai or in Hong Kong, if you enter this website address, chances are that it actually goes to my webpage. And in that sense, the .tw part is, of course, determined by the TWNIC, that is to the Taiwan Domain Resolver, right, the NIC. And also the open response and open recovery actually predicates on people understanding that if they are in the .tw domain, let's use a neutral term here, if they're in the domain and within the jurisdiction, then we do not collect new data in the name of the pandemic period. This is a very easy to understand heuristic. The sense here is that because we understand, for example, on the mask map, we understand if we invent new ways to collect data, people will naturally want to know the cybersecurity and privacy perimeters. And if they are new code, it's very difficult to get a reasonable audit of that. So instead of that, we just say, let's just make use of whatever the refillable chronic prescription interface in the pharmacies are and use that to dispense the map, the mask. And also, importantly, the digital fence, I see someone asking on the questions tab. The digital fence contact tracing system is essentially the same as the earthquake advance warning or the flood advance warning, where the telecoms independently run this code that knows very roughly where your phone is, like within 50-meter radius, so very coarse resolution, and then send an SMS says flood warning, you better evacuate. But there's no way that this will interfere with your application level stuff. So it's not an app that we ask anyone to install. It's just a telecom feature, if you will. And so on the digital fence part, we use the same triangulation method. The 5 telecoms agree to collaborate so that whenever any of the people under quarantine moves outside of the home quarantine zone, then it sends an SMS to the person, but also it sends an SMS to local health officers who will then come and knock on the door and check their whereabouts. And if they break the quarantine, then instead of the 30 euro per day stipend that we pay them, they have to pay us back 1,000 times that as a fine. And so that, I guess, is pretty severe, but that also have already the Communicable Disease Act to back it up. It's constitutional because that's exactly what we determined that we will do had SARS came again back in 2003 when SARS 1.0 hit Taiwan. We were less prepared, and so we basically did a recap in 2004, and the Constitutional Court charged the legislature to basically do exactly this. So this is by design. We are already society inoculated by a previous encounter with SARS. So I hope that answers that particular part. And the other part about the infrastructure, that is a great question. We occupied the parliament back in 2014 for precisely this reason. In the Sunflower Movement, March 2014, the reason that people occupy the parliament is that they do not want the norm of the PRC through this trade deal to somehow become the norm here in Taiwan, because even the word is the same in Mandarin, like Touming, it means opposite things. Back in 2014, we already understand when we say Touming, it means making the state transparent to the citizens, but in the PRC, it means making citizens transparent to the state. I guess it's the same word, but it means actually opposite things. And what they are doing at the time is through this public shaming, preferential treatment, and so on, to essentially build a algorithmic surveillance system that surpasses the law. So it's a rule, a bylaw system, that is to say it is a kind of law, but it actually ignores the usual appeal process, and each province can just add whatever surveillance feature to it. And so around the time of the Occupy, already all the 5 telcos reject the PRC suppliers at a then new 4G infrastructure, but some of them in 2014 were considering the kind of price performance ratio and so on. But the Occupy movement showed very clearly, demonstrating with 500,000 people on the street and many more online, that the amortized cost is actually very large, because when you have a PRC supplier, there's no pure play market players at any given time through the party branch. They can take over so-called company leadership through non-market forces. And the upshot is that we will then have to do a risk assessment to the whole system every time there is a firmware upgrade, anytime there is a cybersecurity incident, and anytime that there's a like 4G to 5G migration, we'll have to redo that systemic risk assessment to see whether the vendor has been essentially taken over by the PRC party / state apparatus. And so amortize the price is just too expensive compared to Nokia, Ericsson, and also, of course, domestic developers. And that is when we put that into the procurement law. So instead of telcos just opting out of PRC components, from that point onward, for anything related to sensitive national security, including cybersecurity, then the tender document must reject PRC suppliers. And then, of course, we'll start building our own ecosystem of clean devices through the cybersecurity standards and auditing and so on. And that has earned us a kind of cyber-secure, battle-hardened, that's the word I'm looking for, a battle-hardened status in the world for the kind of equipment that we understand can resist, or is at least resilient against the advanced persistent threat that is posed by the PRC. And that is the part about trusted infrastructure. Now, the part of the politics and rough consensus. I mean, rough consensus is essentially a politic term. It's just not a traditional Westphalian political term. It is an internet governance term, right? It's straight from the RFCs, the main documents that shape the internet. And so when I talk about rough consensus, I mostly just mean it in the internet governance sense. Oh, I have to manually forward, but okay, that's fine. So picking up a little bit from this part, right? So in Taiwan, we have this idea of a social innovation tour, where I tour around Taiwan and bring people wherever they are. To them, it's just having a regular town hall with me as a co-facilitator. But for me, it's me spending a couple of days in a ethnographic, or just hanging out with local people so I understand where they're coming from, and then connecting them to the 12 ministries in 5 municipalities in a kind of connected room. And that, in turn, make sure that the size of the polity, that doesn't really matter, even if it's a really remote island, a really high mountain, and so on, as long as they do have the broadband as a human right, and they do. If they don't, it's my fault. We can connect to Taipei and other municipalities as if we are in the same room. And that is the basis of this innovation from the grassroots, empowering people closest to the pain. And if they innovate something that can alleviate their local development issues, then we enter a AI-powered conversation. Usually, it's called polis.gov.tw. Now, this is not about a majority. The size, the area that you see here is about the diversity, the plurality, if you will, of people's feelings. And there's no right or wrong about feelings. So even if you mobilize 5,000 people to vote exactly as the same as you, even the population count in your group may increase, but its size will not increase. And most importantly, it will not push out the minority groups. So this is, I think, what I call pro-social media rather than anti-social media, because in other social media configurations, if you mobilize 5,000 people acting the same as you, it actually pushes other voices out, but it doesn't do so in Polis. So sharing the same data, reflecting on common emotions and affects, we arrive at the ideas that take care of more people's feelings than anyone. And this is the kind of the humming part of the rough consensus on internet governance. And in concrete terms, it may be like, I feel that no matter how we regulate Uber, the person on the passenger seat needs to have a viable liability insurance insurance. That is what people can broadly agree on because it's specific enough. It's called overlapping consensus. So my role here is more like a chat room moderator than anything, like making sure that this is open data, this is open source audited, we have good penetration testers to ensure the cybersecurity of the police system, and also interpret the result so that people can see that despite the ideological differences on one side, maybe 5% of all the sentiments, actually most people agree with most of the points made by their neighbors most of the time. And this is new to them because the divisive statements were newsworthy and the consensus statements were not. So people had this false hallucination that we are more divisive than we actually are. And this flipped this around because there was no reply button. They can't attack each other. And so the consensus statements eventually become our agenda, and we use exactly that and only that as the agenda for our face-to-face, also live-streamed multi-stakeholder forums, which then sets the law for, say, Uber. So Uber is now a local taxi company, and there's Line Taxi. There's many other taxis that are virtual in the sense that you can't hail them from the road, but they all play fair, and there's no tension anymore between the so-called regular taxi and Uber because they are the same thing anyway nowadays. And this is what I mean by rough consensus. And also, I think this is internal governance, but with a shared reality. So as long as people can enter a shared reality, maybe augmented with extended reality and other technologies, this I think is scale-free, meaning that it will work on any number of realities. But if you do not have a same reality, then maybe some cute spoke stocks or pink or rainbow masks that can help.
Thank you, Minister. We have a few questions in the Q&A. I will pick up one before coming back to Alice and Marc. I don't know if Séverine Arsène can take the floor, but if she cannot, maybe I can raise a question from her. I think it's very interesting, and a very interesting question. Let me read her question. Taiwan was able to rely on advanced data collection capability in terms of health data for tracing COVID-19 cases. In France, as you know, we would certainly be wary of allowing the state to collect such data. And that's in line with the question already raised by Alice. Is a good quality democracy a prerequisite to such data collection? If you can elaborate on that, I think it could be very helpful, you know, from a European and a French perspective.
Sure. I'm happy to first say that if you have seen the words participatory self-surveillance, I want to use some anecdotes to explain what that exactly means, because participatory self-surveillance is certainly not the state holding all the data. It's actually the opposite of the state holding all the data. There was in April, I think, a time when there was a nightclub and actually an intimate hostess bar, and whose worker was diagnosed with COVID. And at the time, there was this kind of sentiment on social media and popular media that we need to, I don't know, put people to prison or fine them an astronomical fine for essentially working professionally to break contact tracing and also break physical distance, I guess. But the Central Epidemic Command Center resisted that negative, exclusive populist urge, because that will essentially drive people underground. And I mean, after all, the professional worker did have a duty to protect the anonymity of their patrons. They're not wrong in doing so. So instead of a zero-sum game of a top-down, lockdown, shutdown mechanism, we basically said, let's federalize this. Let's build a what we call real contact system, in which that those businesses are still required to ask their patrons to at least give them a SMS number or an email, both of which may be thrown away, and a pseudonym that they can contact in case of a local transmission for 14 days. But if after a few weeks of no cases reported, they just shred the scratch pad and they do not have to submit any of those data to the state, whether it's local government or state government. And so this is basically a social innovation that then showed people for real that they can keep the same anonymity or pseudonymity guarantees that they used to have before the pandemic, while also allowing contact tracing to work. And when they prove that it actually worked, they also have this hats with plastic shields and so on. And when they prove that they actually did comply to the scientific principles, instead of issuing fines or anything, we basically just issued a administrative recommendation, and then gradually the local governments allowed the nightlife to resume because they are still part of the team of 24 million countering the pandemic. So this is what I mean concretely about participatory self-surveillance, and I hope that alleviates some of the fears about this state collecting data in the name of pandemic.
Thank you, Minister. If I may, I will ask you a question, and I remind the participants that they can use the Q&A line to interact with you. And after that, I will be back to Alice and Marc. You have certainly seen that recently the US Senate produced, in my view, a very important report about digital platforms, and in particular about what it is considered in this report as situation of monopolies by the main digital platforms. What is also interesting, it is this notion of network effects, which is underlined a couple of times, quite precisely. And I would be very interested in having your views on this report. I mean, on its substance. Maybe there is nothing new from your point of view, but on its political consequences. Do you expect, with the new Biden administration, a sort of change regarding the regulation of monopolies? Or do you consider that digital platforms have such strong network effects that it would be very complicated to regulate them? So what is your understanding of this report first? And second, what sort of political and consequently economic consequences do you expect from it?
Yeah, so I kind of elided over the banning foreign propaganda masquerading as advertisements during election season, as well as making them disclose in real time the advertisement library as we would actually for the campaign donation and expenditure. And that is actually a really good concrete use case, because we do not have jurisdiction over Facebook in this regard, that we can't really fine them or shut them down if they fail to comply to the new transparency in election laws in Taiwan, because they see themselves as media. However, in Taiwan, we do have, for example, the PTT, which is a social sector-oriented idea of a network effect, very strong network effect actually, forum, but without this whole shareholder capitalism thing. And so once we have a good social sector alternative to the business sector monopolies, then it ceases to be a monopoly. And second, it gives us much better bargaining power. We can simply say to Facebook, and we did say back then, around exactly a year or so ago, that look, we understand you don't have to comply to the same transparency standards, but if you don't, there may be social sanction. And the people who organize such transparency initiatives on the PTT and other social sector forums, they are already complying with these counter disinformation, counter foreign sponsor propaganda. It's a norm that people have signed on. So in that sense, that's why around I think last autumn, Facebook chose Taiwan as the first jurisdiction to really publish in real time the advertisement library when it comes to the algorithmic accountability. Because first, we show that there is a norm here. And second, our social sector is ready to implement the norm. And third, I mean, you are the missing piece. So you either face social sanction or you implement the norms that other social sector players are doing. And to me, that is a quite valuable experience in basically doing a semi-trade negotiation thing with well, certainly not yet sovereign because they've not yet issued their own currency, but a co-governor on the internet. And I think this kind of people first, like social sector first, people, public, private partnerships where the social sector sets the norm, I think has real potential in both the EU like Governance Act, data union / intermediary sense, or the GDPR joint controller sense. I think there is evolving rough consensus nowadays around this sort of things being beneficial and is part of the digital public good, or some people say the digital commons. So I'm all for it, and I think Taiwan can offer a lot of insights because we have a very strong social sector who have built multiple data coalitions successfully.
Before turning to Marc and Alice, I have a question from John Fang, who is seated in Taiwan. Let me read his question. How confident are you in the Taiwan model, its sustainability and continued application by future Taiwanese governments?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a really good question, right? Because at the end of the day, this is about our imagination of technology's relationship with the society. For example, I always call AI assistive intelligence. To me, AI is like this glass that helps me see better, or the hearing aid of my grandma, and so on. But it always must prioritize the alignment to the person's dignity and also accountable if they stray from that alignment. But some people, of course, see like AI as an end in itself and become authoritarian intelligence, in which case the authoritarian polity can use this norm to develop toward the kind of singularity where the singular actor deprive other citizens of their agency. And that is exactly what I meant when I say the transparency means opposing things in the PRC and in Taiwan jurisdictions. And so I would say that there really is nothing preventing any jurisdiction from trying a different vision of assistive collective intelligence. It is certainly compatible with pretty much any polity or any organization. They don't even have to be sovereign. It could be, you know, a book club or a reading club or a university, or really any sort of organization can benefit from the norm that is built by the internet governance. So I'm reasonably sure that long as Taiwanese people remember the martial law and don't want to go back to the martial law, will probably prefer assistive rather than authoritarian intelligence. But I cannot speak for other jurisdictions, but we certainly are willing to help. And this is what I mean by Taiwan can help.
Thank you, Minister. I turn to Marc and Alice for a second set of questions. Marc, over to you. Marc, you are muted.
Sorry, I made a mistake. Minister, can I insist once again on your definition of digital sovereignty, also on 5G? And my new question is about cloud computing. There is a lot of thinking in Europe about building a national in France or European cloud independent from US providers. Is it the case in Taiwan? Do you have, are you using public cloud, like for public administration? And if yes, who are the providers? Are you also dependent on the US providers? And one more question about the PRC and a cyber threat which is coming from the PRC. How do you assess the current cyber threat from the PRC? Is it targeting mostly public public infrastructures, public sector mostly, or more private sector? And how do you prevent, again, this kind of threats? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Alice, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Just one quick question. I really appreciate your insistence on transparency and government transparency. I know that you sort of conduct sometimes meetings with stakeholders or lobbyists openly, or you just try and sort of publicize the contents of your discussions and conversations. I would like for you to elaborate on that, perhaps also relating to Thomas' earlier question about big tech, and especially American big tech. We've had some debates in Europe about lobbying strategies from American companies within the European Union, for example. And so I think transparency on both ends is very, very important. So I would like to hear more maybe about how you implement that in practice.
Okay.
Minister, over to you.
Okay. Right. So first about the radical transparency principles. This is very easy to understand. Anyone who visits me can do so freely in this open space that I just showed you, but they must agree to publish the entire conversation either as a transcript after 10 days of co-editing where they cannot touch my parts, but they can edit their parts, or we publish the entire conversation as a video on YouTube under Creative Commons. The transcript would be in the public domain using CC0. But either way, it basically makes sure that people come to me only make public good arguments. Because if they make arguments that are detrimental to other players, it will look very bad, right? So they don't do that. And that is the principle that I published my conversation with the Facebook Civic Integrity team, with Google and the preparatory conversations with Microsoft Office of CTO will be published in a couple of days, and so on. So basically, all my dealings with these sovereign, or let's just call it co-governance, they are public proceedings, as what we believed and still believe when we occupied the parliament to protest the secrecy of the trade deal agreements with Beijing in 2014. So that has this context to it. So back to the public cloud question. In Taiwan, we have basically our Data Protection Act is a kind of carbon copy of the pre-GDPR European Privacy Act template. And we are, of course, in the light of GDPR, and we are seeking adequacy. I think within a month or so, we're going to send a revision where there will be a single national independent data protection authority. At the moment, the Office of the Data Protection is within the National Development Council, and there are legitimate worries that if there is a kind of state vision of development, then privacy may be sacrificed simply because they report to the same chief commissioner. But of course, understanding the commissioner is actually probably will not happen. But I understand the EU would like it to not happen on a kind of budgetary and personnel point, not simply because our head of the NDC is a good person. Right? So that's what we're doing to seek GDPR adequacy. And under that idea, then we are then able to work with multiple cloud providers. Most of the Taiwanese government's data centers are concentrated to the ministries level, which means that there's around 20 or so different ministries all have their own data centers. And so it's a private cloud, if you will, for the public sector. You see, ambiguous terms. But anyway, so these are government clouds, and they are built by local vendors, certainly not by American or other foreign vendors. And they have to pass very thorough security audits, including red teaming and other international collaborations when it comes to the cybersecurity threats, because we do face those threats day to day. And we do need the suppliers, the vendors to be able to co-evolve with the latest advanced persistent threats. And so that's perhaps unique to Taiwan, because we're quite literally on the front line in this. And so that's then informed our thoughts, I guess, around digital sovereignty, because digital sovereignty usually, I mean, academically, it means a state can act independently in the digital world. But of course, anyone who understands how the internet works understands that this only holds if both ends in the end-to-end communication belong to your jurisdiction. As long as one of the ends in the end-to-end communication falls outside of your jurisdiction, the idea of sovereignty becomes essentially a jurisdictional projection game, and it may or may not work. And the damning thing about the internet is that if it doesn't work, thanks to its nature of permissionless innovation, you probably wouldn't know unless you ban certain classes of cryptography, which some jurisdictions go and do exactly that. But I don't think you want to go there. And so to me, it's more of a interdependence thing. If we understand that this needs to be on a privately operated cloud, then we just do so, and understanding that those ends are well within the .tw jurisdiction. But soon as we start have a international communication, like right now on livestorm.co, then we make sure that our cybersecurity parameters, instead of depending on thorough audit of this particular vendor, I just use a private tab in a browser and with a computer that's not connected to the intranet and so on. So it's at least like 3 levels of sandboxing before I connect to any video streaming systems, and I don't install any software, of course. And so that is just basic hygiene. It's like, wearing a mask and washing hands. So I think this is a useful kind of counterpoint to cyber sovereignty, because if you think about cyber sovereignty, digital sovereignty, or data sovereignty, and so on, the Westphalian model doesn't really project well if you already know in advance that the other end in the end-to-end communication is not within your jurisdiction.
Minister, we are approaching the end of our webinar, so I will take a question from Maximilian Reich, and if I may, I will add a final question before leaving you the floor for concluding. The question by Maximilian Reich is related to the agenda setting for, I would say, internet governance. Let me read his question. How do you reconcile a vested interest from different stakeholders? What is the digital strategy agenda setting mechanism? Is it set top-down or bottom-up? I would add maybe both, but I will let you elaborate on that. And my question is related to your very, I would say, efficient presentation. Fast, fair, fun, what you said, for instance, humor over rumor, for instance. I was very struck by one of your slides, which is radical transparency in Taiwan versus social credits with the PRC. Could you elaborate on this tension? Because that's the fundamental issue, in fact. How do you see the evolution of this radical transparency in Taiwan? And how do you see the implementation of social credits with the PRC? And what sort of tensions do you expect from this? With these 2 questions, I'll let you the floor to conclude.
Okay. So first of all, the join the Gov.tw platform is our agenda setting mechanism. There you can see all the long-term projects, that's to say 1 year or more, from all the ministries, and you can see the petitions, the e-petitions. Well, we dropped the e because more than half of our population is on the platform anyway. So you can see the petitions from your fellow citizens and join them. And with 5,000 signatures, a minister will go and have a point-by-point response. If it's cross-ministerial, then every month we choose 2 topics from the petitions. It could be banning plastic straws to our national identity drink, the bubble tea, right? And then we have a cross-ministerial conversation where we invite the people with vested interest, like the people who manufacture those straws. And turns out they were social entrepreneurs, because when they entered the trade 30 years ago, Taiwan had a really bad case of hepatitis B, and they manufacture those single-use utensils in order to, it's like the mask nowadays, to combat the hepatitis B. Of course, Hep B is now cured thanks to the pharmaceuticals companies, but nowadays they are also looking into higher value alternatives to the plastic straws. So the petitioner, who mobilized 5,000 people in no time, when we asked her, why are you bringing this petition? She said, well, this is our civics class assignment. She was just 16 years old at the time. And the civics class teacher essentially said, set an agenda for the nation as a homework. And she did exactly that. And so they brainstormed and think about, and quite successfully, I must say, circular economy, how to make biodegradable, carbon neutral, or at least little bit closer to neutral alternatives to plastic straws, and they did find some. And so, for example, this this jacket I'm wearing is made out of like 5 cups of coffee bean wastes, as well as around 12 plastic bottle recycled. So this is a kind of living proof of upcycling that really works. And it's got, of course, the marketing power of the petitioner, the original petitioners. And so the vested interests are convinced to turn a better business because they can get the kind of free marketing power from this environmentally vested social sector groups. And so this is a pretty good example of social entrepreneurship, and we continue to do that through the joint platform on the presidential hackathon, which I don't have time to go into, but basically you can get an acceleration from our president, Dr. Tsai Ing-wen, if you enroll into this 3-month incubation program and willing to work across all 3 sectors. Then after 3 months and some quadratic voting on the joint platform, the president gives 5 trophies each year to the 5 champion teams. And those teams, basically, they can turn on the projector anytime and broadcast to the room that the president has promised them whatever they did in the past 3 months will become public policy. We'll do whatever we can in the next 12 months. So that's executive power as Hackathon Award. And that really prompted collaboration across different sectors and interests. Now, back to the idea of social credit. Indeed, I mean, in Taiwan, when we say somebody has a high degree of 社会信用, we mean precisely like the social sector, the 16 years old who started the petition about banning plastic straws, that the society trusts her. But we do not mean that it is kind of like a financial credit system that is monitored by the state or state surveillance and so on. So I think this potential danger is turning more and more real every day. Basically, the idea that like the norm of profiling, of surveillance, of this instrumental norm is becoming more and more like every day. If you ask people in the PRC whether they would consent to it, they were like, some of them will be like, you know, this is, you know, pro-social harmony, so why not? And so this, I think, is the real point in that the AI doesn't enslave people, people enslave people through AI. And so one need to always question like who is behind this AI. And by calling AI assistive intelligence, this is my meager contribution into like making sure that people can always think about it in an empowering way instead of an authoritarian way.
Thank you very much, Minister. It was a fascinating conversation, I think, for all of us. Thank you very much for your time. I hope we will have the opportunity to continue this conversation either in Paris or in Taiwan. Not only, you know, through this video webinar. I think it's also important to have to continue to keep physical contact. So please feel free to visit Ifri when you are in Europe next time. I would like to thank obviously the Taipei representative office in France, and in particular Ambassador François Wu, and also of course to thank the team of the Ifri Center for Asian Studies, especially John Seaman, who managed the show behind the screen. Thank you also to Alice and Marc for their questions. And I think that this webinar is not the last one on this very important issue. So, Minister, thank you, and let's continue the conversation when you want.
Thank you. Live long and prosper.
Minister.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.